Hello, I'm a man who's in his mid-40s. I have a regular job working in an office. Usually, when asked to describe myself, I answer that I'm really just an average guy. There's only one unbelievable incident that's ever happened to me. That's what I'd like to talk to you about today. If I'm honest, I've never fully recovered from the trauma from what's happened to me. I still feel scarred and I go through my daily life. I drink every night. I haven't been able to eat regularly. I've lost around 15 pounds. My condition has put stress on my parents. Regardless of the fact that I'm turning 50 in a few years, I'm still their child, and they care for my well-being. They say that talking about the things you've been through is the best way to work through your problems. This time is no different. I wish I didn't have anything to talk about, though. To be honest, I'm a bit hesitant to open up about everything, but I think it's time to tell my story in hopes it will help me deal with what's happened. It all started when I met a girl. For an average Joe like me, meeting a girl like her completely flipped my life around. That girl would go on to become my wife, Shelley. She was exceptionally smart. She went to the top university in our state. She worked at a big company out of college for 8 years, then left to open up her own restaurant. She didn't start a restaurant because she wanted to cook, though. She was interested in the business side of running a restaurant. She hired chefs and waiters to do the regular work while she ran things in the background. She had so much success, she eventually turned her restaurant into a chain and opened 10 locations that she was in charge of managing. She successfully created and was running a well-oiled business. She never had set working hours, so she'd have to work at any given time of day or night. Before she knew it, she turned 40. We met when a mutual friend of ours introduced us. I was part of a group of people who liked to go out and write reviews about different restaurants. One of the people who I was friends with in that group happened to show my wife a picture that I was in. She asked about me and said she wanted to meet. A few days later, we ended up going to the same party. And that's where we met for the first time. My friend who was at the party with me told me about Shelley. He told me that she was the owner of a chain of restaurants, and she came to the party specifically to meet me. I was a little confused at first. Why would she have any interest in me? I didn't really understand it. When she and I got to talking, I was pretty direct with her. Why would you be interested in me, of all people? I'm in my 40s and have a subpar office job. I'm about as average and boring as they come. You must think I'm somebody else or might have heard the wrong thing about me. I think it might be better for you to know who I am, so you don't waste your time. She let out a laugh and said, I don't choose men just by what job they have or how boring they think they are. In fact, I'm already in my 40s too. I can't afford to be that picky. When I first saw you in that picture, I couldn't take my eyes off you. I wanted to get to know you and see if there was a spark once we met each other. That's why I wanted to meet you. We were both very upfront with one another right off the bat. We both tried to be as authentic as possible with one another. We really hit it off and talked for hours. I was 3 years younger than my wife. Not saying that's young, though. I wanted to be as transparent as possible with her so she wouldn't get the wrong idea about who I was. If I'm being completely honest, based on first impression alone, she actually wasn't really my type. It may sound shallow, but I could tell she had some work done on her face. I'm not talking about the quality of work that celebrities get. It was more, well, unnatural looking. I wasn't sure if it was what I wanted to be waking up and seeing first thing in the morning every day. However, as time went on, even Shelley herself brought up her appearance. I kind of look like a cyborg, don't I? She joked. She had such a good personality, and she was open about her faults. That's not something a lot of people are willing to do. We quickly went from casual acquaintances to falling for one another pretty quickly. We started seeing each other more romantically. We barely ever bickered because Shelley was the type of person to not dwell on things. The more we met each other, the fonder we grew of one another. She told me about how she always worked hard to make her parents proud. She wanted to be able to support them one day, if necessary. She was their pride and joy. They really did a good job raising her into being a wonderful woman. The only thing that I found a bit peculiar was that they were still treating her a bit like she was a child. I don't think a woman in her 40s needs to be reminded by her parents to eat her vegetables or brush her teeth before bed. It wasn't too big of a deal. In fact, I found it pretty funny. There would be times when we were out on a date and she'd get a call from her mother. "Yes, Mom, I separated my whites. I'm a grown woman, you don't need to remind me. I'm on a date with Charlie right now. I'm hanging up the phone. No more calls today." She was always so apologetic when things like this would happen. I thought it was adorable. I never had a sister growing up. Only brothers. I'd never seen the relationship between a mother and her daughter up close like this before. Shelley was an angel with my parents. It was clear how much love was given as a child. Her parents really put the time in to raise her. Shelley was a considerate, loving, and kind woman to everyone she met. That was part of the reason why I decided to marry her. I wasn't interested in the money she made, even if it was way more than my salary. She never once brought that up. You'd never know how successful she was by talking to her. She was humble and honest. I never imagined I'd find someone this perfect. There was only one issue that I had on my mind. Shelley had a younger sister. They were only a year apart. However, her family never brought up her younger sister in conversation. Shelley never said anything about her either. I found it a bit strange. I always wondered why they never talked about her. I had two cousins who were sisters. In their case, they loved each other more than anything. They were the most important thing in each other's lives. That's what I thought of when I thought about the relationship between two sisters. My wife and her sister were the complete opposite. One day I let my curiosity get the best of me. I asked Shelley about her sister. "Your parents obviously love and care about you. I never hear anything about your sister, though. All I know is that you have a sister. Nothing else. I find it a little strange that you guys never talk about her. Doesn't she still live at home with your parents?" Shelley responded, "Oh, now that I think about it, I guess I never told you about my sister. Since you brought it up, I suppose it's time to talk about her. We're going to be husband and wife soon. It's important to know everything about each other's lives. I'll be as transparent as possible with you. I hope you'll do the same for me. I think you can tell by now my sister and I don't have a good relationship with one another. When we were younger, we got along so well, but as most girls do, she started to change when she was a teenager. She started hanging out with the wrong crowd. She wound up pregnant when she was 18. She was terrified of having a kid that young. She tried to keep it a secret for as long as she could. She'd try and cover her stomach up so my parents wouldn't see. My mom found out 2 months later. My parents understandably went ballistic. With us being so close in age, my parents were constantly comparing her to me. I always listened to my mother and behaved. I was good in school and was even class president in middle school. My sister was the complete opposite. She was a delinquent and broke all the rules. The stress from my parents and from being pregnant caught up with her. At 16 weeks, she had a miscarriage. From then on, not much changed. She didn't go to college and lived trying to make ends meet. When she was 22, she told my parents she was getting married. She brought home a guy who was 8 years older than her. They eventually got married and had a kid. She actually seemed to be living a happy life for the time being. In the end, they got divorced a few years later. She moved back in with my parents. Her ex-husband said the reason they got divorced was because she cheated on him. She was back home with my parents with no money to her name. She lost custody of her child, too. That's about as much as I know about her life. You've probably noticed my parents can be a little overprotective of me, right? They don't want me to turn out the way she did. I didn't want to tell you about her right away because I didn't want to scare you off. Even now, my sister still doesn't have money. She's deep in debt. My dad begged me to move back in with them to watch over her. Instead, I go over there pretty much every day. My sister leaves every night and doesn't come home until 6 or 7 in the morning. I have no idea what she's doing every night. I get the feeling my sister is avoiding me. Deep down, I think she knows what she's doing is wrong and doesn't want to face me to talk about it. She hasn't spoken to my family in longer than I can remember. So yeah, that's the story of my problem child sister. I responded by saying I had no idea about any of that. I'm sorry for bringing it up. I wouldn't have mentioned anything if I'd known it was such a sensitive issue with you and your family. At least for me, though, it feels good to talk about things like this every once in a while. I hope I didn't put you in a bad mood. She laid her hand on mine. Don't worry about it. It's fine. There's no need to apologize. I should have told you about this way earlier. I'm the one who should apologize for taking this long to talk to you about it. Well, that's about the extent of it. My sister's made a big mess of her life. I wouldn't say I'm embarrassed of her, but I'm definitely not going to brag about anything she's done. I mean, she's bad, yeah, but there's no use dwelling on it or trying to meddle in her life. I had never seen Shelley like this before. She was always so cheery, but not after talking about her sister. I could tell it really weighed down on her mind. Shelley opening up about her sister made my love for her grow even stronger. I made up my mind. We hadn't even been dating for a year yet, but I knew she was the only one for me. I proposed to her. I finally met her sister, but it wasn't until the day of our wedding. She never showed her face at the rehearsal dinner or any other meetups between our families leading up to the wedding. I had been looking forward to meeting her ever since that day Shelley told me about her. Shelley and her sister could not have looked less alike. She could definitely attract the attention of most men, and she had aged really well. I imagined that even as she grew older, she'd maintain the beauty she had fairly well. I bet when she was younger, she had guys lining up to try and talk with her. Even one of my friends at the wedding was interested in her and asked me about her. I caught a few other guests staring at her throughout the wedding. When I went up to her and finally got the chance to introduce myself, I told her I've been looking forward to finally meeting you. A soft, gentle smile ran across her face. I've been waiting to meet you too. My wedding was super busy, so unfortunately, we didn't have more time to talk with one another. Once the wedding was over and things calmed down a bit, I told her we should go out for lunch sometime. However, the wedding ended up being the only time I ever saw her. I never saw her again, even when I went over to Shelley's parents' house. I brought her up to Shelley and her family, but they avoided my question and quickly changed the subject. I kind of got the feeling that they were purposely trying to prevent me from seeing her sister. Her family clearly didn't consider her sister as a member of their family. They thought of her existence more as a black spot on their family more than anything else. Every time we did something with her family, her sister would never be there. Eventually, I got used to not having her come out. I accepted the decisions they made to leave out her sister. In the end, I stopped asking about her altogether. A year had passed since we got married. I met my sister-in-law for a second time at my father-in-law's funeral. He was diagnosed with lung cancer a few years back. It was stable for a while, but eventually got worse and spread. He toughed it out long enough to walk Shelley down the aisle. He was suffering, but he couldn't bear to think of not seeing his daughter on her wedding day. Tears fell from my wife's eyes as she spoke her final words to her father. Thank you for being there for me that day. A few months later, there was another huge event in our lives. We were blessed with a beautiful baby girl. We were a little worried about what kind of success we had with my wife being over 40. Most women her age had a really hard time getting pregnant. She was truly our little miracle. We came into pregnancy with very high hopes but low expectations, but in the end, we were so incredibly lucky. Of course, my mother-in-law was over the moon about her new granddaughter. She said she was so proud of us, especially me. She told me in private how fortunate she was that I came into Shelley's life. She hugged and kissed me and thanked me for being such a good husband to her. I told her she had raised a beautiful, amazing daughter, and I was indebted to her for getting the chance to marry someone as wonderful as Shelley. The birth of my daughter went smoothly and she was very healthy. However, one night my wife got a call from her mother. It was pretty rare for her mother to call her, especially since after her father died. She was surprised and a bit worried when she got the call. She thought something might have happened at their house. She picked up right away. Shelley's facial expression got more and more upset as she talked with her mother. Shelley muttered a solemn, "Okay." As soon as she hung up, I asked her what happened. Tears were already falling from her eyes. Becca's in trouble again. She packed up all her stuff and left in the middle of the night. She left with the card for the account my father put money into before he passed away. Mom said she couldn't get a hold of her. She probably turned her phone off. My mom is sick to her stomach worrying about what's going to happen to her. This isn't good. She definitely did something to get herself into trouble again. What should I do? I rubbed my wife's back and comforted her. I said, your sister's an adult. You don't need to worry. She can handle things on her own. A week passed. A month passed. No one heard from Becca. She still hadn't come home. We had no way of knowing if she was even still alive or not. Shelley and her mother were worried sick about her. They eventually went to file a missing person report. However, it was apparently very hard to file one for a person over the age of 18, especially under the circumstances in which Becca left. In the end, the police said it sounded like Becca left on her own and there was nothing they could do. My mother-in-law would go to church every day praying for Becca. She prayed to God that she was alive and safe, wherever she was. It was hard on all of us, but it was especially hard on my mother-in-law. She had just lost her husband a year ago, and now her daughter was gone. She was really at her emotionally breaking point. 3 years later, none of us still saw Becca. There wasn't a day that passed where my wife didn't think about her and worry about her well-being. Even on birthdays and holidays, which would normally be a time to relax and enjoy ourselves, Shelley and her mother still worried about Becca. In fact, those days made it particularly hard for them. Her mother would say, "How did things end up like this for our family? My William is gone. Now Becca is gone too. Please, you and Shelley never leave my side. I don't know what I'd do if I lost either one of you." My wife and I had a long talk about what to do about her mother. We decided to move in with her. We proposed our idea to her mother, but she turned down our offer. She said Becca might come home any day now. She didn't want to have a full house in case Becca came home because she'd think she had nowhere to stay and then run off again. Even though Becca had a reputation of being a problem child, her mother loved her just as much as she loved Shelley. She meant everything to her and loved her more than anything. Aside from Becca's disappearance, Shelley and I were living normal, happy lives. For our family itself, we didn't have a care in the world. Thinking back on those times, I wish time stopped right then to preserve the happiness we had as a family. Those times were the best memories I have in my life, even to this day. Especially because now, I don't have the chance to spend time with my wife like I did back then. I still remember that day when my wife said she had to go to a meeting and left for work. On her way there, she got into a horrible car accident. Her car flipped and burst into flames on the highway. I was told she died instantly. I never had a chance to say goodbye to her. I couldn't tell her I loved her one last time. It was 8 years after our marriage that my angel returned to heaven. I was in complete shambles after my wife passed away. My life was a wreck. I laid in bed, a hollow, emotionless shell of the person I used to be. I had never experienced pain like that. It still didn't feel real. My wife was taken away from me in the blink of an eye. I should have been there with her. It should have been me that died, not her. It crushed me that I couldn't spend her final moments together. It felt like I was drowning. sinking deeper and deeper every day. How am I gonna live without her? I cried to myself. I repeated that sentence to myself 100 times a day. How could I have that conversation with my daughter? She was only 7 years old. She was too young to comprehend death at all, let alone her own mother being gone. How could I fill the role my wife had left? When something like this happens, there's no guidebook for what to do next. I was experiencing this all for the first time, and I had no idea what to do. My mother saw how much I was suffering from losing Shelley. She said she'd watch our daughter for the time being. She told me, "Don't worry about her. I'll take care of her until things settle down. You need to worry about yourself above everything else." I had my curtains shut 24 hours a day. I never looked at my phone or a clock. I had no idea if it was night or day. I didn't care either. It was about 2 weeks after Shelley passed away when I got a knock on my door. I wasn't expecting any visitors. If my mother-in-law was coming over, she'd always let me know beforehand. She wouldn't show up unannounced. I had no idea who or why someone would be knocking on my door. I was just going to ignore them. But 10 minutes later, they were still knocking on the door. They started ringing the doorbell too. They must have known I was home somehow. I peeked out my window to see who it was. It was a person who I'd never expect to have ever seen again. There she was, standing right at my front door. My sister-in-law, who had vanished into thin air only to reappear slamming on my front door. I opened the door and we just started at each other for about 10 seconds. I broke the silence by saying, "What have you been doing? Where have you been this whole time? How did you know where I lived?" She responded and said, "It's cold out. Let me in and we can talk." She pushed her way through the door and came inside. She continued, "There's something I wanted to talk to you about. I've been keeping it in for a long time. I've wanted to tell you since the first time we met each other. I think now is finally the right time to talk to you. If my sister were still around, I think I'd have had to wait even longer to tell you about this." My heart was beating a mile a minute as I listened. Somehow, Becca knew everything about Shelley's passing. I asked her, "If you knew about Shelley passing away, why weren't you at her funeral? Where were you? Where have you been this whole time? You completely vanished without a trace. We had no way of knowing if you were even still alive." She told me Mom and Shelley told me to never show my face around you. They gave me a crazy amount of money and told me to go far, far away. I guess they thought I would do something to you or say something they didn't want you to hear. She and Shelley completely orchestrated me leaving. They were the ones who planned out everything. The only one who didn't know about it was you. Everyone else in the family knew what was going on. Do you understand why they did that? Do you know why they handed me all that money and told me to disappear? This is why. Look at this. This will tell you everything you need to know about what kind of people they really are." She grabbed my arm and pulled it down towards her leg. It took me by surprise, so I let out a scream. She brought my hand towards her shin and said to me, "Touch this. Touch it. The squishy part. This is evidence for what they've done to me." This reminded me of when my wife told me about Becca being impulsive. Something felt off, and it seemed like was trying to do something weird. I didn't really get what she was doing, but I didn't feel comfortable. I felt like she was up to something. When I pulled my hand away from her grasp, I accidentally grazed her leg. I felt it. Just like she said, there was something squishy on her leg. She took off her coat and rolled up her pant leg. She showed me what was on her leg. I tried not to look, but I couldn't help it. My eyes locked on to what she was showing me. I gasped when I saw it. I couldn't believe what I was looking at. I was speechless. It was a gigantic scar, from most likely a burn. It looked there used to be a huge blister that turned into a scar. This may sound insensitive, but it disgusted me. The image of that still disturbs me even now. Once she saw I'd taken it in, she rolled her pants back down. I thought you needed to see this so you could find out the truth about my sister and mother. If I just told you about them, I knew you wouldn't believe me. My leg isn't the only proof I have. I brought more evidence with me." The first thing she told me was that my wife and mother-in-law were not her real sister and mother. At first, I was completely shocked. I obviously had no idea she wasn't part of their real family, although the more I thought about it, it made sense. She really didn't look like either of them. She told me how her mother would constantly remind her that she wasn't her real daughter. Ever since she was young, her mother and sister would abuse and bully her. They were to blame for Becca's life taking a turn down a dark path and for the trouble she got in. Their father would go away for business every week. When he was gone, Shelley and her mom would kick Becca out of the house. She had nowhere to go. She would meet up with one of her friends who had run away from home. That's when she started drinking and smoking. Her life had completely changed for the worse from that point forward. She told me when she got pregnant at 18 years old, she was actually really happy. She thought she'd be able to start a life with the guy who got her pregnant. She'd finally be able to leave home and get away from Shelley and her mother. In the end, she unfortunately lost the baby. But for that brief period of time before she lost it, she said she was truly happy, even if it was just from the thought of leaving that house. That was the same reason she got married when she was younger. She wanted to get out of that house at all costs. However, she said that after she got married, my wife took a liking to her husband. My wife lured him in with her money, and they had an affair. She was the reason for the divorce. I stopped her in the middle of what she was saying to say, "Do you think I believe any of this?" "This is ridiculous. You're lying," she said. Like I said, I knew you wouldn't believe me. She showed me papers and evidence of my wife's involvement with Becca's husband from years ago. She had stacks of pictures that documented everything she was saying. It showed my wife and Becca's ex-husband together from when they had their affair. There were photos of the two of them going in and out of hotels together. She even had recordings of my wife's voice as evidence of her abusing Becca. It was rough, but I listened to it all. However, if I'm completely honest, it still didn't feel real to me. I had a hard time believing that it was really my wife's voice. The voice was talking in a way I had never heard Shelley talk in. The tone of her voice may have sounded the same. What she was saying didn't sound like my wife at all. "Listen here, you worthless piece of garbage. Did you think an ugly orphan like you would be able to hang on to a husband? Did you think you'd be able to stop me from stealing him from you? Why would you waste your time talking behind my back to my mom? You didn't think I'd find out. You might honestly be dumber than I thought. My mom told me everything. She's on my side, not yours. Not only are you hideous, your body is a mess. Being pregnant at 18 totally destroyed you, I bet. If only your husband knew your past. He doesn't know what a sewer rat you are and the grimy things you've done in your life. If he did, he would run for the hills. Don't even think about talking back to me. If you do, I'll heat up the hairdryer again and work on your right leg to match your left one. Everything you're doing is pointless. All you're doing is getting on my nerves. Nothing you try to do is going to change anything. Get that through your ugly head. Oh yeah, by the way, your husband is a horrible kisser." Every hair on my body was standing up as I was listening to this. Becca said, "To be honest, I think I know the reason why my sister never got married until later on in life. She was too busy preying on men. She always thought she could reel in men with her money. And she did. She loved the thrill of luring in a new man. This was the woman your wife really was. She was rotten and evil. You heard what she did to my leg, didn't you? When I was young, she heated up a hairdryer and held it down on my leg. She said that's what I get for not listening to her. I never went to the doctor for it, so I never got it properly treated. Now I'm left with this horrific scar as a reminder of how terrible she was. Father didn't care about any of this. Shelley and her mother lied and sucked up to him and covered up the horrible things they were doing to me. A long time ago, he said, Just listen to what your auntie says, and you won't have any problems. It'll make me happy if you do that too. That's why I never went to him when all of this was going on. Even when I showed him all this proof, he didn't do anything to stop it. He was just as horrible as they were. And then you came into the picture. They did everything they could to try and keep me away from you. They were afraid I'd expose them to you. When Father passed away, they gave me close to $1 million. They told me to never show my face again. They told me I'd never be able to save up this much money even if I had 2 lifetimes. I recorded that whole conversation. My jaw almost hit the floor when they offered me that kind of money. Every time they said they wanted to talk to me about something, I always made sure to take out my phone and record it. I knew what kind of people they were, so I made sure to document it all. I took the money they offered me. I had no choice but to vanish out of thin air from that day forward. I couldn't just turn down that kind of life-changing money. I knew I'd need it someday. I asked her why she waited this long to step forward about everything, especially with all the evidence she's collected over the years. She said she wanted to hide away for a couple of years. Then one day she wanted to come out of nowhere and bury my wife with all the evidence and completely ruin her. A classic case of revenge being a dish best served cold. She had all the money and the power she needed to take her family down. She wanted to wait until they were living as happily as possible to crush them. It would hit them the hardest when they least expected it. She was biding her time until she felt the time to unleash on them was right. However, my wife passing away wasn't part of Becca's plan. She said she's been looking for me so she could finally tell someone about everything. Becca said that when she heard Shelley died in a car accident, she didn't shed a single tear. She said she got what she deserved for pain she's caused me and others. She stepped on the necks of everyone in her life and used them for her own satisfaction. That's why I didn't feel any sadness when she died. She had it coming. If she would have led an honest life, then God wouldn't have punished her. What goes around comes around. When I heard that, I said to Becca, "You may be right about Shelley, but you still shouldn't speak ill of her now that she's gone. Whether you believe she got what she deserved or not is irrelevant. I still don't understand what the point of telling me all of this is. What are you expecting to gain from this? What do you think is going to change by telling me about who she really was? You talk about the pain she caused you, but have you thought about how this is making me feel to hear all of this? I'm still in mourning. It hasn't even been a month yet." I understood where Becca was coming from. To her, Shelley and her mother were nothing but evil. To me, though, I still considered them as my wife and loving mother-in-law. I didn't see the point of dragging them through the mud now. Nothing would change. My wife was gone, and all Becca was doing was hurting me by telling me about what my life would have been like. I was fed up with her trying to slander them. Angrily, I said, who Shelley was to you and who she was to me are completely different people. To be brutally honest, what she did to you was unforgivable, but that has nothing to do with me. I loved her and your mother, and what happened to you doesn't change my feelings for them. Everything you're saying is just harassment. You've made your point. I don't need to hear anything else. What are you trying to accomplish making them out to be villains now? Or are you trying to get revenge on her for stealing your husband by trying to seduce me? What's your endgame? I was so emotional I let that slip. I didn't necessarily think that, but to be honest, I didn't know what to think in that moment. Becca could feel how defensive I was getting. I was trying to defend my poor wife in heaven from what Becca was accusing her of. You still don't get it, do you? Your wife was addicted to men. How sure are you that your daughter is yours? She looks nothing like you. Open your eyes and connect the dots. She handed me an envelope and then left. I opened it to find pictures showing an affair my wife was having. The date on it was the same day she said she had to go away for business. I finally accepted what Becca was saying about my wife. I sat and I thought about my wife and her mother now that I knew the truth about them. If I had heard all of this while my wife was still alive, even if it were years from now, I don't think I would have been able to accept the truth of the situation. I wanted to go and see what my mother-in-law had to say about all of this. I was dying to know what her reaction would be and what she'd say in response to the evidence Becca brought to me. I felt like she already knew the truth about my wife. She'd know about her affair, and if my daughter was really mine or not, they were accomplices after all. They worked in tandem to abuse Becca. I thought about how I'd confront her mother about all of this. At first, I wanted to unleash all the rage I was feeling. Is this true? Did you know this all along and try to hide it from me? But then, as time passed, I decided that wasn't the right approach. Going in with a cool head would be much more effective. Letting my anger get the best of me wouldn't have solved anything. I gathered up all the evidence Becca left me with, including the photos exposing my wife's affair. I purposely showed up unannounced to my mother-in-law's house. As soon as I pulled up, I could see my mother-in-law in the window. She looked excited to see me. She came out to greet me and lead me into the house. What a pleasant surprise! I'm so happy to see you. I've been worried sick about you. I haven't heard a word from you since Shelley's passing. How have you been? You must have really been in a bad place if you couldn't even text me for support. I didn't want to reach out first and make you feel pressured to have to text me back. I'm just so happy to see you and know that you're doing okay. I just dropped Jenny off at piano class. She'll be home in an hour. It would be great for her to see her daddy. We can all have dinner together once she gets back. I'll make you a nice big meatloaf. I know that's your favorite, right? I cut her off. I'm not here to have dinner. I came because I have a few questions for you. I just saw Becca. She came over to my place earlier today. She vanished into thin air years ago, only to reappear on my doorstep today. I could see the look on my mother-in-law's face change as soon as I said Becca's name. It was a look I had never seen her make before. She didn't seem relieved that she came back or even worried about where she'd been. I saw fear in her eyes. She was terrified about what I was going to say next. She must have known what was coming. She showed up. She couldn't even make it to her own sister's funeral, but she comes out of hiding on today of all days. Why did she come to see you? Why was she there? What did she tell you? I paused for a second, then said, Mom, I've learned a lot of things that are hard for me to accept. But first, aren't you interested, or at least worried, about Becca? Do you know where she's been or how she's been since she left? How could Becca have known about Shelley if she's been gone this whole time? Why did she know that Shelley passed away? Based on how you're acting talking about her, I get the feeling that you've been in contact with her this whole time. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I can't help but feel that way. Her eyes darted back and forth as she said, Oh, did I say something to make you think that? I'm shocked to hear she came back. I didn't have any idea where she was or what she was doing. Did she say where she'd been all this time? I threw down the papers and pictures Becca gave to me onto the table. Cut it out. Your act isn't going to fool me. I've had enough of your lies and deceit. You knew about all of this, didn't you? I bet you knew Jenny wasn't my real daughter, too. You've kept up the fairy tale for too long. I know everything, so there's no use in trying to avoid the truth. I'm already planning on taking a paternity test, so no matter what lie you try and spit out, you'll be wasting your time. You need to tell me the truth. Now. As I expected, she insisted that none of this was true. I let her know I was moving forward with getting a DNA test to find out if Jenny was mine or not. I told her she'd only make herself look worse if she kept lying until the results came in. You can't run for much longer, I said. My mother-in-law changed her expression again. This time she spoke more aggressively. Of all the men Shelley could have picked from, she chose you. A good-for-nothing, pathetic little man. What a fool. You couldn't see what was right in front of you. You have no idea how lucky you were to have a woman like Shelley and have us to support you. If it's come to this, then I have no reason to hide anything. You got your money from Shelley's death? What more could you ask for? What are you whining on about? That's more money you could ever earn in your lifetime. That's not enough for you. It's not my fault you were dumb enough to raise that girl as your daughter. That's right. She's not your child. She's not yours, so why don't you just leave her here and get lost? Go far away and never come back. She was like a real-life Dr. Jekyll. And Mr. Hyde. I never met someone so two-faced in my entire life. I'm glad I finally figured out who she really was, even if it took this long. I was so grateful to have found my wife and have a mother-in-law that was so loving. Unfortunately, that made it hurt worse when I found out the truth about them. I completely cut ties with my mother-in-law and that family. I followed my mother's advice and took the money that was left for me after my wife passed. I had nearly $2 million I planned to live off of for the rest of my life. About 3 months ago, I got a call from Becca. She said she was planning a lawsuit against her mother. She was going to get revenge for all the horrible abuse my mother-in-law put her through. She was going to bring it all to light. I was rooting for her. I told her, don't let that evil witch get away with everything. Make her suffer just like she made you suffer for all those years. I thanked her for opening my eyes to the truth. If it weren't for Becca, I would have gone through the rest of my life hollow and depressed about losing my wife. Thanks to her, I was able to pull myself out of that dark place and get on with my life. You'd think I'd be devastated after learning the truth about my wife. While I was shocked at first, it's actually become the reason I'm living life to the fullest now. In fact, I was thankful things turned out the way they did. It was all thanks to my wife. I didn't have any ill feelings towards her. In fact, I came out of this experience better than I had been before I knew everything. The truth hurts, but it also set me free. Not to mention the money I have now to live a comfortable life. Now all I have to worry about is living an honest life. If I did, I'd have nothing to worry about. I wanted to treat others with love and respect, and I hoped that would reciprocate to me. I'm not necessarily a religious person, but some might say this was a miracle. God was at work to pull me out of despair. Whatever life throws at me, I'll meet it with a positive attitude. Thank you for listening to my story. I'm hoping all of you are able to find happiness like I have.